So I want to start asking you by how did you got into dog training?
I was born into a dog family. So
Okay.
my parents competed with dogs in conformation, which is the beauty stuff. And they actually did do obedience trials with Lhasa Apsos, which is something of an accomplishment. And, not too many people were doing that. There were no other sports back then. So I've been in dogs I've been competing for more than 40 years.
Wow.
And back then there was no agility, there was tracking, there was obedience, there was confirmation, and that was kind of it. So it was just a different time.
Different. And when you started dog training and you were telling people that you were a dog trainer, would they like give you a look of what do you mean by that? Or they wouldn't understand what were you doing?
I don't think I called myself a dog trainer. So when I was young, so I was competing when I was a kid, right? 12, 13 years of age. So I wouldn't have said I was a dog trainer because I was a kid. I would have
Okay.
said that my hobby is training and competing with dogs. And then I had no intention of being a dog trainer. I had another career and did other things. And then, but I've always done dog sports as a hobby. So
Okay.
that was just about something I wanted to do. And then I had a kid, and he was high maintenance, and there was no way I was going to be able to put him in daycare and go back to my old job. So it just became pretty obvious that that wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And so I became a stay at home parent, but I'm not cut out for that. And so I figured out that I could go to a dog club where I wanted to be, train people's dogs for, I think I was charging $30 an hour, which is pretty darn low, and basically make enough money to pay the babysitter so I could get out of the house a couple days a week. And that meant a lot to me. And then for various reasons, things happened. So I started teaching. My husband was home. And this would have been right around September 11th, because that was my husband lost his job as a result of that. And so he was home. And so I was working more and working a little more and a little more and a little more and a little more. And I just never went back to my old job. And then one day I realized I was actually a dog trainer, but it took a long time before I started calling myself a dog trainer. I thought of myself as a stay at home mom who trains dogs on the side.
Outside.
And then
I see what
my
you're saying.
husband never went back to work. So apparently he became a stay at home dad and I became a dog trainer.
That's funny. And when you started dog training, was there someone that you were looking up to, or you were doing it just because you love dogs?
Well, when I started, boy, I mean, that's so long ago. Um, Back then, I would have looked up to whoever was successful because I was in a different place then and I wanted to be successful. So if you were successful in the ring, I would have admired that. And there were certainly people that I can think of who fit that profile. Um, and then when I came back to training, I remember watching Terry Arnold, who was an AKC obedience competitor, and I attended her seminar. And this would have been, oh my goodness, I was probably 26 or 27. I'm 55 now. So a ways back. And I went to her seminar and she talked about bright and happy dogs. And her dogs healed in a way I had never seen. I mean, well, they look like my dogs look now. But back then, that was like, I'd just never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
And I was pretty well riveted for the 3 days of that seminar. And with hindsight, I got all the wrong stuff from the seminar, but that's okay. Like I went back several years later and was reading my notes and I realized that I missed all the stuff that I should have got. Like she just kept talking about engagement and getting the dog to be happy, but then, yeah. I wanted to know the techniques. How do you teach sit? How do you teach down? And it's so interesting to go back and read because you pick up what you are ready to hear at a given time. And at that time in my development, I was about skills, the complexity of teaching skills to get the work, and was just completely not ready to hear that the skills are the easy part. The engagement, the life, the beauty of the work has nothing to do with the skills. And I just thought that was so interesting to go back and read my notes. It's an interesting thing for anyone to do, to go back if they went to a seminar and they took notes and to compare what they remember as being important with what they wrote down. And so then as time has gone by, I've worked with, more and more trainers that I picked up various things from at different times. So now I largely look up to people who work at my online school. There's a reason they're there, and that's because I admire what they do or some aspects of what they do. And so I want them to work at the school because I want them to teach the things they know and do so other people can learn them.
Um, when you started dog training, when was the what was the moment when you realized that you were good at it? When you noticed that you can compete or compete against other dog trainers and stuff.
I don't think there was really a time when I thought I was good. I know there was a time when I thought I knew everything, but that's actually a different question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty normal, and I actually remember a conversation around that, and that would have been maybe 20 years ago. I thought I had a pretty good handle on stuff. And then there's nothing like working with more dogs. And because of how I teach and what I do, I tended to get the extremes. I tended to have clients who either had very low drive dogs that were difficult to motivate or very high drive dogs that they didn't know how to control. I didn't get very much in the middle. And the more you work with difficult dogs and novice handlers, who often there's really nothing wrong with the dog, it's a people problem, the more you realize you better learn more or you're not going to be successful. And I'm kind of a believer that necessity is the mother of invention. I really believe that expression. And that when you have no choice because you're not solving a problem within the parameters that you have set for yourself,
Yeah.
that you become clever and creative. There's nothing like me being in a seminar, having an exceptionally difficult problem presented to me, and having to come up with a solution within the next 5 to 10 seconds to motivate my brain to figure stuff out.
I see.
So I don't know that I ever thought I was good. I mean, I'm pretty open about the fact that I'm not really a competitor, I'm a trainer, and those are not the same.
Yeah.
I compete because I train. I don't train to compete.
I see.
And that's why I'm in no hurry to get in the ring because I don't particularly want to be there. I'm there because if you don't compete, you don't test your training. And if you don't test your training, you don't even know what's wrong with it. You go to a dog show and what you thought was glorious is not glorious. And there is very little like the force of the pressure of knowing that you have to get your dog to do the thing in a difficult environment without reinforcement, without punishers. That is what makes you up your game. And if you don't do it, you can tell me how you could do it till the cows come home, but you need to do it. So when people say, "Well, are you going to be successful at this or that?" I don't know. And even if I am, it doesn't tell you anything about what's going to happen with the next dog or the one after that. Every dog you take up, every sport you take up, you don't know what you have until you test it. And that's why we have dog sports, is to test what we think we have and then to take the feedback of our success or failure, which doesn't bother me particularly, and do better and strive for more. But I would have no problem never going in I would be perfectly happy to take my dogs and let other people compete with them. I wouldn't care, except that my dogs won't work well for other people, not the way they'll work for me. But otherwise, I'd be like, help yourself. I don't have any desire to be there. And then I'll take that feedback, but it doesn't really work like that.
That makes sense. And this question's probably you have heard it a couple times, but why are you so passionate about dogs? Why you still run the business around dogs? Why not?
I
do
don't know.
another.
I don't know why. Some people love to garden and they'll sit there for hours. And I look at that and I wish I loved to garden because my garden would look better, but it's not in me. There's no driver there.
Yeah,
And for me, it's actually not. I love dogs on different levels. First of all, I'm really intrigued by animals as a concept. Humans are animals. We may not love that, but the real is that we actually are. And I'm fascinated by the fact that the earth is populated by all these species and that we have chosen to separate ourselves from all of the others with no reason whatsoever. We just happened to be lucky and hit the jackpot and ended up on the top of the old pile. But it's really interesting to me to look at all of the animals and to contemplate the similarities and differences. You will learn an incredible amount about human beings by interacting and training animals if you choose to learn. I mean, you can choose not to learn. You will learn a lot about our society and the way we structure our society around our beliefs. And you can learn that by watching with animals. And you can see how over and over again we have these similarities. That fascinates me about the thing called animals. Dogs, in particular, fascinate me because they live in our homes. And if you actually stop and think about that, that's a thing. That we have another species that actually lives in our homes and enriches our lives dramatically. So much so that around the world, living with dogs is not an unusual thing whatsoever. Even people who have them in the yard, the fact that we can connect with them and take something from our relationships, maybe you don't feel lonely when you have a dog. That's actually kind of amazing. I'm
yeah,
fascinated by dog training because I enjoy the process of breaking. It's just constant puzzles. Everything you do is constantly a puzzle. How is this working for you? How is your dog responding? And if you care how the dog feels about it, which I do, then where did you go wrong if you don't like what the dog is showing you? Or how might you fix it? To me, that's just this endless puzzle. You'll never run out of things to work on. You'll never run out of fodder. Even if you get exceptionally good at a given dog sport and spend a lot of time there, each dog brings something sort of different. Now, my attention span's pretty short, so I don't tend to stay with a given dog sport for a long time. I do it and then I'm like, okay, it's not that I couldn't learn more in those sports. I certainly could, but I just sort of lose some of my drive for it, my
right.
enthusiasm.
Makes sense. I do agree with you on the part of dog training. Can be some stuff of dog training can you can apply into your own life. When I actually started dog training, the biggest lesson that I got was like consistency. When you start training with a dog, I mean, when I started training dogs, I sucked. Like the dog would always wander around, he would scratch his head, and I wouldn't know what to do. But then after maybe like after my 50th trained dog, it's like, huh, I thought that dogs were behaving better, but actually it's like I'm becoming better actually because I know how to get their attention and stuff. So I do agree with what you just said.
It's
I
a
also,
feedback loop,
yeah, correct.
right? The dog tells you how you're doing if you choose to take that information.
Yeah, I agree. I was listening to your podcast, and the one that got most of my attention was the dogs aren't children.
Mm.
And I wanna ask you first, why did you name the episode of that podcast like that?
Why is it called food for thought?
No, dogs aren't children for that episode.
I think there was a question mark. I think it was dogs aren't children question mark. So what I want to bring to people is what are the similarities and what are the differences?
Okay,
And there's a lot of similarities. There are also some pretty obvious differences. We're not the same species, and a dog's cognitive abilities are nowhere near what they are in an older human child. We're a different species. And I think for a really long time, when I was in school, I remember being in middle school and then making a big deal about how you shouldn't attribute human traits to animals. And the irony of that is enormous because humans are animals. That is a scientific reality. So there's some great irony to how it was presented. as you must always separate out what it is to be a person from a dog. And the idea of saying, well, if I have this reality, then maybe a dog does too, was pretty frowned upon, and really still is on some level. But you know what? They keep sticking dogs in MRI machines and lighting up their brains in different ways. I'm like, oh, what a coincidence. When you poke the part of the brain that humans light up when they feel affection towards or love towards others, poke the same part of the dog's brain, and guess what happens? The same behaviors result. When a dog shows, hi, you came home, the part of the brain is the same. That's not a coincidence. We're mammals, and they share many, many, many. They do these studies, which, okay, there was one with cats where the thing that was interesting is that the study had nothing to do with the MRI or the brain, but I just picked up on it. The study was actually about whether or not predatory behavior increases under hunger. So they had cats that were free feeding, and then they were looking at the brain to see what was happening with predatory behavior. And then they had cats that were withheld the food. If you're curious, the end result is that hunger does increase predatory behavior. But that was not the part that fascinated me. The part that fascinated me is that they were looking at the brain and saying that the cat was experiencing predatory feelings. And I'm like, whoa, that's the interesting part of this study. But that wasn't what the study is about. See, that's just taken for granted. So within the scientific circles, they just know oh yeah, no, this is where if you poke this part of the brain, it makes the animal feel angry. Whoa, 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 whoa. Like, that's a big deal. The fact that we can do that and correlate the brain structure of a human and get the same responses from a human who can say that makes me feel angry, that's not minor. That's enormous. And yet it's just, oh, yeah. No, that's just a known thing. We've gone beyond that. Now we're testing to see, well, what happens if you withhold food or change it? So the fact that the scientific community just takes it for granted,
Yeah.
that's a pretty big change from where we were 30 years ago when you weren't allowed to say that animals felt happiness. We couldn't say that at all. So I'm not all that worried about people attributing human traits to dogs. I'm very concerned about humans denying the emotional lives of dogs because
Yeah.
it contributes to cruel behavior.
Makes sense. I do agree with that. But being honest, one of my biggest pet peeve is when I see someone taking their dog in the stroller. Like I don't like that. That's and especially if it's like a husky or something. Like I really don't like that.
I have to tell you, I've actually never seen it. So I've seen people put their dogs in a stroller like old dogs,
Yeah,
that can't walk. So they're just taking them out. So what
that
I
makes
would
sense.
say is in a percentage, if you're using percentages, I'm all about the numbers game, right? So if I ask myself, how often do I see a dog being pushed in a stroller like a husky because the human has some problem and hasn't is desperate for a human child, so they're doing really bizarre stuff? I say, what's the percentage? And then I ask myself, what's the percentage of people who have their dog being literally dragged down the street behind them because they're on their phone and they're not noticing that their poor old dog can barely keep up and is being dragged? How often do I see each of those? And I can tell you, I see people being unkind to their dogs pretty often,
Yeah,
pretty often. And yet,
I
if I
do.
saw somebody with a husky in a stroller, I'd be talking about that. You would hear about that because it's so unusual.
Yeah,
So I don't worry about the weird and the bizarre. I worry about the common. And the common is people disrespecting their dogs, not treating them like human infants.
yes, I do agree that I think like the old narrative of being alpha, being you have to be dominant with your dog, still, I mean, a lot of people believe that. What do you have to say about people thinking that they have to be the alpha of the house to show that their dog doesn't become dominant and stuff?
I do think somebody in any dynamic is probably leading the show at any given moment, right? So if two people meet at a party, one of them will be dominant over the other. What tends to happen is one talks a little bit more, one is a little more forceful, one cares more about a topic, they're more passionate. When I encounter someone who's really passionate about a thing or topic, I stand back a little bit. I let them take that stage because it's important to them. And because I actually don't care. I'm not a strong person in the sense of I'm actually pretty happy to listen to people talk about whatever. I don't feel the need to do a lot of talking. I get to talk my whole life. I'm happy to listen. So when I'm in a situation where people are interested in their thing, I listen. In that encounter, that person is dominant to me. And it's very rare that I am going to assert myself. I might, but I probably won't. Some people go through their entire lives being assertive to the point that some of them we start calling them bullish, right? We avoid them because they trap you in a corner, you can't get away. And others go through their lives being submissive, right? They never assert. They should assert themselves sometimes, and they get trampled. In my home, I am dominant to my dogs. And I know we don't like that word, but take it out of the context of wolves, take it out of the context of dogs, and just use it in the sense of one being at a given moment, one being in charge, more forceful. And I am dominant over my dogs in that sense. I get my way, right? Generally, the conversation I want to have is the one we have in my home. I don't need to get there by being an ass. The fact is, I have things they want. That's all I need. I have food, I have toys, and I've got a decent personality. If you've got those three things, your dog might want to be with you. Then I just add a little structure around it. So I call it leadership. I don't call it dominance. I usually say it's a leadership matter. And as a result, when my dogs aren't quite sure what they should be doing, they tend to look at me and they ask for information. Now, you'll also see this with dogs among themselves. So if there's a knock at the door, the dogs go running to the door. What you'll notice is that most of the dogs will look towards one of the other dogs. And that's the dog in that dynamic at that moment that is going to tell the others what to do, generally. And if that dog is losing it, all the dogs lose it. And if that dog is like, whatever, then all the dogs calm down, right? So it's not that I don't think leadership is a thing. I think it is a thing. I do think I want my dog to look towards me when they're not sure what they should be doing. And I want my dogs to look towards me when I ask them to look to me. And I have that. Where things get weird is when we think it has to have consequences attached to it, because it doesn't. I will let somebody talk about something that maybe only vaguely interests me simply to allow for human interaction, even if I'm not that interested. I don't have to feel punishment. I don't have to feel like if I walk away from this conversation, something bad is going to happen to stay engaged for a period of time. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I don't want to be rude. So I may or may not find the conversation interesting. I might try to redirect it to something else. Who knows? Probably not to dogs or me, because now I'm going to bore them. But I think our dogs are very similar and don't have a problem with people taking a leadership role. I do have a problem with the idea that there have to be negative consequences or, see, here's the thing, or what? Like, that's where people never go. If your Sheltie doesn't sit when you tell it, what exactly do you think might happen? What, world domination? Nothing is going to happen. And that's where things get weird. When I call my kids to the table for dinner, if I want to have dinner together, and they don't come on the first command, I don't go running down the hallway, banging on doors saying, damn it, when I say it's dinner time, you need to come. Like, why do we do that with our dogs? Why are we so concerned that them not coming the moment I say come because they were sniffing means we need to go into a rage? Nothing is actually going to happen, really. So it's like with my kids. If I want them to come faster, maybe I say something they care about, like dinner is served. It's something you like. Or maybe just give them a minute. It's dinner time. I'm finishing up my TV program. All right, I'll see you in a minute. Whatever, right? I think that's where things get weird. People get afraid of losing control. Don't lose control. It's a Sheltie, for God's sakes. It doesn't even matter. And if it does matter, then you have a bigger problem. You can motivate others to want to engage.
I do agree with that. When I started dog training, well, I was training this English screamer, a young English screamer, like maybe 8 months old, something like that. And when I started training with him, that when I realized that every dog has a different personality, which sounds funny because how you said you just think they're animals, but this was the moment that I really realized that okay, so not all the dogs can be trained the same way. So usually, when some dogs start to wander because they're not sure what you're asking for. So with this one, I would add a little bit of pressure. And what I mean by that, I would stay like in front of him and wouldn't let him move. But then I started realizing that he started like shutting down, and you could see it in his face, like he would try, like his part of the mouth would be like, um, he would be like puffing, or he would be just scared. And I
Yeah.
was like, "What's going on?" And then I had to like rebuild my entire relationship with him, start playing even more, and it's like what you just said, like you can go with every dog is different and it's very similar to kids, different personalities as well.
Yeah, I mean, where are you going with it? That's a good question is what is the purpose of the training? Where are you going? To me, the purpose of training, if you're not doing dog sports, is the relationship, right? It's about learning your dog. It's about having a good time together. It's not about making my point. It's not
Yeah,
about demonstrating that I can make you do things because realistically, there's nothing like dog sports to teach you that you actually can't make another being do a damn thing. You really can't. You think you
yeah,
can. But the thing is, if I have a leash on you or whatever, then you're not trained. Like if I call you and you only come because I can make you, I don't understand how that's useful. It's not useful to me if you're only coming when you're on a leash. I need you to come when I don't have control over the situation. That's what training is. And to me, that's about developing relationship and getting everybody wanting to do things. And also
with you.
training does cause the dog to pay more attention to you. You somehow now show up on their radar, like you matter. Somehow. You can matter because you're nice or you can matter because you're mean, but you want to matter so that the dog thinks, I better pay attention. I
Yes.
want to pay attention. And you can decide what you want to do with that. But you know what amazes me? People go on and on. You got to train your dog, and they've got rules. I've never seen so many rules. Dog trainers, I swear to God, are the most controlling individuals. And I think, how do most people get through life with their cats? Most people do not train their cats. And yet, somehow, they manage to live with their cats even though the cat goes out the door before them. How is that true? How come cats don't like slit our throats in our sleep? Why is that? And yet nobody even thinks about it unless a cat has a behavior problem. And when a cat has a behavior problem, which they do, like they'll start yelling all night or peeing in your house or whatever they do, people don't say, well, you need to show them who's boss. You need to, I don't know what. They deal with the behavior. Like, why is the cat doing the behavior? They try to work on the behavior. I don't know how dogs ended up in this place where we added all these rules. And now we've gone beyond that. And as dog trainers, we tell other people that they need all these rules or else. And my question then is, but or else what?
Yeah, I think I think the rules came because dogs are much bigger than cats. So if a dog jumps on a kid or on an elderly person, can do more damage if a cat jumps on another person. So I would say that rules come from the size of the dog. But I do agree that some cats, like I don't like cats because I don't know where they can bite you and stuff because they don't like to be pet or something. But I
You
do
know what
agree
we
with
do when cats don't want to be petted? We stop petting them.
petting
And you
them.
know
Yeah,
what? When they swipe you, you learn from the experience. You ask,
yeah.
what happened? I'll tell you my cat story because I have a cat, nastiest damn cat. And she's a barn cat. There's a reason she's a barn cat. There's a reason nobody wanted her. So one day, my husband was in the hospital a couple years ago, and so I was feeding the animals, the livestock. I don't normally do that. And I got the order wrong. I didn't know I was supposed to feed the cat and then feed the sheep. So I was feeding the sheep before the cat. And she literally came across the barn at my face. And if I hadn't been holding the flake of hay, I've never seen anything move so fast in my life. Give me a dog any day over a pissed off cat. It was scary. So anyway, I learned the rule, feed the cat before the dog. But it's interesting because we adapt to cats. We take in the information. But with dogs, we get into, damn it, I'm going to teach you not to do. Yeah, we just have a different mindset. And the problem is, even if we are successful, even if I taught that cat by kicking her every time she came at me not to do it, it is true I could probably prevent her from coming at me, but it would not carry over to the next person who walked in the barn. They would be at risk, right? And she certainly wouldn't want to spend time with me. It wouldn't be like, oh, I just needed you to kick me so that I would understand. It's not going to work. What would happen is she would learn to stay away from me, but her basic behavior would remain the same. This is true of dogs too, but we don't like that. So there are many, 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 many dogs who behave for one person in the home, one, and they do it because that person is hard on them, whatever that means to you. The cat still jumps on grandma, still jumps on the children. And if that person is not around to constantly monitor the dog's behavior, the behavior doesn't change. Now, there are a million solutions to this, but recognizing the normalness of behavior, figuring out where it comes from and addressing it at the root level really works a lot better than obedience because it attaches to everyone. It doesn't just attach to the one person in the home who has developed a do what I say or else relationship.
I agree. I agree with that. Um, Another episode that I heard was the crating episode, that dogs should be or should not be crated. And in your opinion, do you think all dogs should be comfortable with being crated?
I don't know. Most dogs are not crated, and it just doesn't matter. Um, it's a convenience if dogs can be crated, and there are times when life is easier if dogs can be crated. So it's something that my puppies are crate trained because it makes housebreaking a lot easier. And I may or may not maintain it for life in the sense of having dogs in the crate on a regular basis. One of my dogs eats his meals in his crate, so his crating is maintained.
Yeah.
And at night, he often sleeps in his crate. So his crating is maintained because I go to dog shows and such. He crates in other spaces comfortably because that's much easier for me. My second dog is never crated at home. So his crating is maintained because I do take him to events. And so once in a while, he's crated, not very often, but a couple times a month, or, he can be crated. But your average person doesn't actually need a crate in their home. So if they have one, that's fine. That's great. Whatever. It's convenient at times to be able to. Maybe if you have guests and your dog is big, maybe you want to put the dog away. But most dogs in most homes get to a point where they're part of the family and they're just left loose. So I see it like any behavior. If you need it, teach it. If you don't need it, don't spend a lot of energy on it. I mean, I know people say, yeah, but what about when the apocalypse comes and then you need to be able to crate the dog because, yes, that's true. But I don't spend a lot of my life worrying about what about if. That's exhausting. To live your life waiting for the emergency, okay, but there are other things that are going on in my world that are probably more likely to happen in the near future, and I'm probably going to spend my energy there. So, for example, I do muzzle train all my dogs because it is extremely likely that all of my dogs will go to the vet. And if a dog is struggling in pain or just temperamentally doesn't like people or whatever, I want my dog to be muzzle trained. So, if I'm going to take my effort, I'm probably going to put it there over crate training if it's going to be a struggle. But it doesn't even matter what I do because my life is mine and my circumstance. What I'm going to look at is what do other people do. And if they say that they're not going to maintain crate training because it's not important to them, then I'm going to say fine and well. Now, if you need it down the road, let me know. We can talk about it. But I try not to put my agenda on other people. I try to talk to them about what they need. So there was a kid in my house yesterday, is a friend of one of my sons, and they know I'm a dog trainer. So he was asking me some questions, and he has a dog, and he said, he sent it to a couple of trainers, and it comes back, and it still has these problems. And so he wanted to know if, he could pay me. I pay the trainer's dog. And I said, why don't you just tell me what the problem is? And he goes, well, and he told me this problem about the dog jumping on people. And the dog continues to jump on people, even though they need the dog and they do all these things. And I said, all right. What are the circumstances? When does the dog jump on people? So we kind of drilled down a little bit. And then I said, all right, great. When people walk in the door, because that's the problem, throw down a handful of food. The dog will eat the food. And by the time the Cheerios or whatever are eaten up, the dog is calm and, and it was so interesting to watch his expression because it was clearly a, holy crap, it never occurred to me there might be a solution rather than just putting more and more pressure on the dog. It's just thinking a little bit differently. So that is something he needs to solve. So that's going to work for him, I think. Now I have 2 dogs in my house. One of them I do attend to not having him jump because he's big. The other dog is 10 pounds. He does occasionally jump on people, and I have yet to have anybody care. So should I teach my 10-pound dog not to jump on people? I don't know. I mean, it really doesn't matter. So maybe he will jump on you. Most people think it's adorable because mostly he doesn't jump on people because he's like, I don't know you. But if he does, most people are like, oh, he likes me. And he does actually. So I'm not a fan of rules in dog training. I'm a fan of looking at a circumstance. What is your circumstance? What is giving you grief? Let me help you fix that. Let me help you find a way to live in harmony with this dog. That's it. That's all.
I like that. So do you think with puppies creating is important or no? Or again depends on the circumstances?
Depends on the circumstance. If a dog lives outside all day, doesn't matter. Pees outside, poops outside. What difference does it make? In many countries around the world, they make it illegal to crate dogs. Now, I think that's a little extreme. Personally, I mean, crates are useful; they serve a purpose. But people do manage without crates. Like when I was a kid, we didn't have crates. Nobody had crates. So I don't know. We did all right. The concern I have about crating is it's becoming normalized for dogs to actually quite literally live in a crate. I don't think there's anything normal about an animal living in a box that is the size of the animal. Like, what zoo in the entire world is allowed to put an animal in a box the size of the animal? None. Zoo animals have way more rights, at least in the United States, than dogs. They are not allowed to keep them that way. They're not allowed to put them in a circumstance where they have no capacity to either interact with their species or show species appropriate behavior or have freedom of movement, because movement is absolutely an innate part of animals, of mammals for sure. And yet I know that some people's dogs live in crates 23 hours a day. I know this for a fact. If you have 8, 9, 10 high drive dogs living in your home, let me tell you how those dogs are living, because it's exceptionally unusual unless you have, Labradors who can get along kind of nonstop. It's very unusual to have a dog like a Malinois where you can have that many dogs living in harmony without a whole lot of crating going on. And okay, fine, I understand that you've chosen that way, but I don't think we should normalize that choice.
I
I think
agree
we
with
should
that.
be asking some really serious questions about why do we feel that's acceptable.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um, so also I was looking at your podcast of I missed it. Anyways, the question is, do you think we should put our convenience first or the dogs first?
Neither.
Neither.
Society has rights, dogs have rights, people have rights. The question is, what can we do that everyone gets enough of their needs met to be content? I don't think my dogs have more rights than I do. I don't think that's reasonable.
Okay.
I think I have dogs because I want them. And if you want them, don't you want them to be happy? So, kind of by my choice to have dogs, I care about their well being. But that doesn't mean I'm giving up my own rights or my children's rights or my neighbor's rights. Like, everybody needs to be considered. And I think when we remember that we chose to have a dog, that comes naturally. I have found that there are groups of trainers who put the dog's rights and welfare above everyone. And I have found that there are groups of trainers who put the rights of humans above everyone. And I think those are both very odd perspectives. To me, it always has to be balanced because that is how everyone is most likely to get as close as possible to a happy state. But you always have to think that way. Here are your options for training whatever it is you wanted to train. How does the dog feel about that? How does the human feel about that? And how do your neighbors feel about that? Because your neighbors matter too. Like, you may not mind that your dog barks all day when you're at work, but you know what? You're not the only person in the neighborhood. So it's always about, like, how is everybody doing? And I think that leads to our best outcome.
Okay. Okay. And your book, Conversations with Reika, Reika, when I started reading like the summary, because I didn't have time to read it, the first book that came into mind is the one that I'm reading right now, Dog is Love. I don't know if you have seen it.
I have,
And
yeah.
in your book it says that Reika understands human nature. The Dog is Love starts similar the same way. And my question is, with Reika, how did you find out that she understand the human nature?
So, to be really clear, Conversations with Reika is fiction. And I mean, dogs don't talk, right? So, what happened with Reika is we would be in various scenarios, whatever they were, and I would just find myself looking at her like when she took stuff out of the trash. Now, Reika never took stuff out of the trash until she was 14 years of age. Never took stuff out of my trash. And then she did. And one day I watched her just right in front of me walk over to the trash, start taking things out of my trash. And I took the stuff and I put it back in the trash can. And I saw her look at me and go right back to the trash can, take stuff out of the trash. And so then in my own head, I started creating dialogues of what was going on in her head. I don't know what was going on in Reika's head. And what I do know is that she enjoyed engagement with me. And she had a pretty good sense of what was going to work for her and what was not going to work for her. And those things changed dramatically over the course of her life. I wrote that book. It started out as just entertainment. I put all those stories on Facebook. They would come to me, I would just put them on Facebook. But the problem is, see, well, Reika was an old dog. And then I realized that Reika couldn't just disappear. Like, she was on Facebook every couple of days, and people, when they would meet me in person, they wouldn't say, "Hey, Denise, how are you?" They'd say, "Hey, how's Reika?" I mean, she had become quite a presence. And I realized she couldn't just disappear. And yet she was starting to have health problems. And I did not choose to talk about those things because the social media world has no sense, and I didn't want to deal with that. And then I decided to start exploring how I was coming to terms with the end of her life. And that was the purpose of the book, to start talking about how she went to the vet and to start processing how I was making decisions about what was I going to do and how was I going to come to terms. And I gave her that voice, my process. And then that's where the book went, to the end of her life. And when I switched the tone, it was really interesting because I never planned on making a book. On Facebook, how many people started to just really literally follow along as they had old dogs at home. And they would say, "Your posts are giving me a framework to think about my dog getting old and dying, and you're helping me a lot." So that's really where I went with the book, and why it became a book, because I thought it was important and that it filled a niche. Um, Plus, she's just a sassy dog, and she's a fun dog. She was a lot of dog. And so I think she was a good vehicle for that message. But I don't know. She was just a very, I called her self-singular. If she was a person, she would have been exceptionally unattractive. I mean, who likes human beings that are self-centered, opinionated, don't give a damn about anything? Like, that was Reika at the end of her life, was just, everything is about me. I'm going to do what I want to do. And it's like a toddler who never grew, right? Toddlers and old people are the same in many ways. And so that was kind of where Conversations with Reika came from and why I did that book. That's my favorite book, by the way, of the ones I've written. I think it's the most important one, even though it's not, certainly not the bestseller, but it's the one I think is
Mm,
important.
important. Yeah, I saw that most of your books were about agility and obedience, and then the conversation with Reika also got my attention because it was like uh, the part that got most of my attention was that understanding human nature. And the book that I'm reading right now talks about how dogs have lived with us for such a long time that they're understanding body language from humans. And I thought that your book was about that your dog was understanding. Well, technically, it's what you explained that with the trash can story that your dog was understanding how to engage with you, which I find very interesting.
Yeah.
So, in there's a episode of you of boarding training. Do you like people that are in charge of boarding trains or no?
Well, it's not about how I feel about the people. I just think that board and trains are, well, there's a few problems. First of all, they are rife with abuse. They are such an opportunity for somebody to send their dog. I cannot tell you how many people have sent their dog to board and train. And when the dog came back, what they said to me is, he's just so subdued. That is bad news. If you send your dog away, there is no reason why your dog should come back subdued. That's actually scary, because for something that happened somewhere else to change your dog's personality in your home for a period of time suggests PTSD level abuse. It's bad. Too many people send me notes saying, I sent my dog to board and train and now he's biting me. Or I sent my dog away to board and train because he was biting and now he's biting more. And the person said, turn up the e-collar. I get way too many of these kind of notes. It's disturbing. I don't know why people choose me for that, but they do. I believe that board and train, by virtue of the fact that they have a lot of pressure on the trainer to get a certain number of things done in a certain amount of time because people make promises, I think they are set up to breed abuse. And that's a huge issue. So right off the bat, there's just too much going on there that I suspect is just bad news. But even if you take that off the table, the second thing is that they tend to suggest to the owner that the dog is going to come back different than the dog left. If the dog comes back different than the dog left, then you need to be asking questions about what happened there. Dog training does not change a being into another. In the same way that if a child is introverted and you want it to be extroverted, you don't send it to the extrovert trainer and it comes home extroverted. You don't change the behavior of a being into something it's not. This is true for dogs too. So board and train cannot change a dog's behavior. And the implication is that board and train is changing behavior. What board and train can do is jumpstart a dog's understanding of a variety of cues. But that's useless unless when the dog goes home, a lot of energy is put by the owner into maintaining and working with those cues. And then the question I'd ask is, then why did they send the dog away in the first place? The people who are most likely to use board and trains are the ones who are least interested in actually teaching the dog. So I think I understand why trainers like them. They are lucrative. And for a lot of people, they can make a whole lot of money, thousands of dollars in a short period of time. So I could totally get it. But that doesn't mean that they are really in the best interest of dogs or dog trainers or even dog owners. And again, the whole I sent my dog away to training and it never fails that the next thing they tell me is that it didn't work. Like they don't say it that way, but I sent my dog away and he is still. Well, yes, of course he's still doing those things. None of that training took place in your home. None of it was transferred. And the whole idea of, well, they have a 1 hour lesson once a week for 4 weeks to transfer the behavior. Yeah. Nobody learns dog training in 4 hours. Like that's not the way it works. It's an interactive process. So I just think it's not that they couldn't be useful, but they're just not used in a way that I find is genuinely useful most of the time.
I do agree, especially with the part of the e-collar. I don't know how you feel about them, but I do think you should start introducing your dog to cues instead of just putting a e-collar on, especially for the recalls. I think that you have to teach him that you're more interested than their environment first, and then if you want to make the recall bulletproof, you can add the e-collar. But I think a lot of people use the e-collar as punishment instead of, they don't know how to use it correctly. That's my take, that a lot of people just use it for punishment. And my question is, like, what do you feel about e-collars, prong collars, collars in general?
Uh, the reality is most of those tools are pretty overused.
I agree.
So I did use an e-collar back in the day. And I remember how I used it. And it was probably a lot like most people use it. It was in the time when you couldn't control the remote at your hand. Like you had these plugs that you had to put in it, and you had 5 levels, So you would put in the level you wanted and you would do the thing. So I put in the highest level and I did the thing, right? And solved some problems I had as long as he was wearing the collar, right? He was chasing livestock, so it worked. And I used it for recall, and that was good. And then he got hit by a car wearing the collar because he didn't respond. Now, that had nothing to do with my choice not to use e-collars after that. I I didn't use e-collars after that, but for a completely different reason. People think they put too much weight on guarantees. The reason my dog got hit by a car wearing an e-collar is because I wasn't paying careful attention. And by the time I realized he was chasing, and it was a fox, and it was on a university campus. Like when did foxes show up on university campuses? It was too late. Like once they're in that certain running, chasing mode. And the lesson I've taken from that, and to this day, too, one is I tell people there are no guarantees. And the second thing I tell people is you need to pay attention. You need to pick environments which are appropriate for your dog, for your circumstances. Regardless of what tools you choose to use or not to choose, you must know what is reasonable. Many, many, many dogs go through e-collars. It's not unusual, especially in a predatory situation. So what's the solution? Turn up the e-collar or change the environments that you operate in under certain circumstances. Prong collars. So I don't really understand why people are using tools to train behaviors when you can just use food. I mean, I don't get it. Like I see people training sit and stuff with the pressure on the collar. Why would you do that when you can use food? It's faster to do it with food. It's a lot more fun. For me, it's a lot more fun for the dog. So I don't understand, when we know so much these days about training, why people choose to use tools that they don't need. Now, having said that, when an old lady takes her 100-pound dog for a walk and doesn't want to break her hip, and so she puts a prong collar on the dog, I'm not going to say anything about that. See, now, is that my choice? Well, no, but when I'm an old lady, I'm going to try not to have a 100-pound dog so I won't be in that boat. But the point is, it's already done. The old lady already has the 100-pound dog. So now, how are we going to solve that problem? I would probably opt for a head halter. That would be my choice. Or a front clip harness. And I did have to deal with this situation a few months ago. I was trying to help out an old lady and her dog. And I'm not a dog trainer anymore. Like you can't pay me I don't do that anymore, right? But this circumstance, I was helping out. She had a prong collar on the dog. And the dog went through the prong and she hurt herself. She broke her wrist, she broke her arm. And now she's afraid, right? And it became a cycle. So I went into this lady's house. The house is too small for this big, big dog. And so now the dog's going crazy because the dog needs to get out. The dog needs exercise, but it's so big and it will go through a prong. It doesn't care that she can't get people to walk the dog. And so the end result that we used was a head halter and a front clip harness. And in that combination, she wouldn't walk the dog, but other people could now walk the dog. So it was safe. If she had been able to walk that dog safely in a prong, I have nothing to say. I just don't. I would rather see that dog out there going for a walk than stuck going crazy in the house, playing games of keep away, desperately trying to have some kind of quality of life. Now, it doesn't help that this dog had an incredible number of health problems. So rehoming a dog that was costing the amount of money that wasn't going to happen. Big picture thinking, right? That is how I'm going to look at it. I'm always going to ask, what is the kindest option in this scenario that we have? And when I see people making choices over and over again that are most certainly not the kindest option, I just don't understand it. It's just confusing to me when a professional trainer who certainly should know the alternative, should certainly know that there are kinder ways to get from here to there. I have a hard time getting on board with the choice because it's just easier than learning something new. And yeah, you got to learn something new. And I know this works for you. And I know you've been doing it this way, but you know what? You don't have to do it that way. So stop and think about the dog's perspective for a moment. And if you have an alternative, take it.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And that way, I use all types of collars and harnesses and head halters. But if someone wants to use the collar, I always start with a martingale, and then if that's not enough, I go to the slope, the get right. If that doesn't work, I use a prong, and I do it by that. I don't like when people go directly to the prong, especially if they're like golden doodles. Like I don't know why people sometimes have prongs on golden doodles because it's a golden doodle. But yeah, I do agree with your point with that. I think people have to learn how to use them for to not overuse them. And well, lastly, the last question is: I see you're very active on social media. What is like the message you want to give to people about training dogs in general? Like what's a message you want to live in the world? Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry. I don't think most people actually understand what kind of a relationship you can have with the dog. I just don't think they understand what it can be. And it's an amazing privilege and joy to have a dog who genuinely wants to be with you, wants to work with you. My dogs are always in the same room I am, not because they have to be. It's where they want to be. When I walk towards that front door, my dogs literally come screaming through the house and bash into the door. They so want to be the one who goes out and gets to work. You know, there's a lot of ways to live, to manage, whatever. But I think when you've had a relationship with a dog where you are truly their friend, I don't think that can be explained, but I think it can be shown. And I think when people watch my dogs working, and if they look carefully, they'll say, wait a second, I've never seen her put a leash on a dog. How did she do that? Like, I would rather people start asking the questions themselves. Why do I never have a leash on my dog? Why are there no collars on my dog? Wait, she doesn't have any collar. What's in her hand? A toy? Wait, there's no toy in her hand. How is she getting those behaviors? I think getting people to ask those questions for themselves leads them to ask if they can have what I have. And people ask me all the time, and I do have resources, right? I have an online school that helps people. And so I'm just an educator. I really am an educator. And that's an important place for me. And that's where I want to be. Like I had a conversation with a friend the other day. I was annoyed about something on Facebook. And I said, you know what? I'm tempted to just stop. Like I'll just show flashy, cute clips of my dogs being brilliant rather than showing the process. And she's like, yeah, but you wouldn't be happy because you're an educator. And she's right. Like I'm not interested in just showing flashy things. And what that means, it means I have a very high engagement rate on social media, but I don't have a lot of followers. And the reason is because most people are just not that interested in how I got there. But it's important to me to teach people how I got there. You can actually train a dog off of my social media. If you went back far enough, you could do it, right? You could just start mimicking it and you can get stuck at times, but that's all right. I'm an educator at heart, and that's why I do what I do and constantly come back trying to get people to think about what they're doing and decide if maybe they want something different, or if maybe they could have something different, or maybe they just want to see what's possible. And there's a lot that's possible. I cannot tell you how many times in my life I've been told something was impossible. The way my dogs have been trained, I've taken a lot of grief over the years while people told me it was impossible. And then I got the first obedience champion without compulsion, all the while people telling me it was impossible. And then I got another one because then they said, oh, it's because that one dog. Well, then I did it again. And then one day I realized nobody's interested in you proving anything. I could do all the things that I'm told today is impossible, and they'll just find another explanation. It's the breed. It's because it's a male. And when they run out of explanations and moving the goalposts, then you know what they say? Then they say, well, you don't know what she does in private. Once I realized where this was going, I said, I'm not going to try to prove anything to anyone. It is a waste of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to train my dogs. And if you're interested and curious, come along for the ride. And if you're not, that's fine. That's fine. Do what you want. If you mistreat me on social media, poof, you will be gone so fast because I discovered the block button and I don't tolerate abuse. But short of that, ask questions. I don't have a problem with that. But if you want to come along and watch, come along. If you don't, that's all good.
Well, Denise, thank you so much for your time, and I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.